wall that was set up, and in my mind, logistics is a key part of that wall. And so with that sort of as background, you want to talk a little bit about the sort of the Sealift challenges we face in the Pacific, sir?
Yeah, well, clearly the obvious one is just the tyranny of distance. It's a long way to go to get out there. Whatever, absent any forces you may have forward. And hopefully we will have gotten enough strategic heads up that, there is movement in that direction so that we could begin our buildup. But still, it's going to take a long time. And, to move what will likely be necessary to be moved out there in terms of war stocks and not just forces, but sustainment for those forces, it's going to take a gigantic effort. And to be, I think we all need to be eyes wide open here that the Chinese have certainly studied what we have been doing, how we have done our logistics, how we have done our Sealift in the past, and I'm certain already have a plan to interdict that. And then actually, where are we going to build up our force? Where is our footprint going to be? I know Admiral Paparo, Indo-Pac is looking at this. He mentioned it in a speech not just a few weeks ago, but he's looking at it very, very seriously, which is, I think, a very refreshing thing to hear a combatant commander talking about that and talking about it, in those kinds of terms, that he knows that could be very well the linchpin, the shortcoming to our success or failure in any kind of an operation we're going to have out there. But you then throw in the new operating doctrines that both the Navy and the Marine Corps have introduced lately, distributed maritime operations for the Navy, spreading out their forces, much more broadly than the old traditional, all formed around the carrier battle group type of operation. And then the Marines having their expeditionary new way of doing business, where small groups are going to be on disparate islands, potentially interdicting Chinese forces. So keeping them supplied, sustained, and delivered, those in of themselves are two new logistic challenges on top of just the traditional challenge of getting it there, and now getting it there in a contested environment. It's this is a much more challenging calculus potentially this time around.
You mentioned when we talked earlier, you mentioned Admiral Paparo's comments around the the distributed maritime operations and expeditionary advanced base operations, and the challenge of logistics there. He also mentioned in the article that I read the notion that logistics seemed to be more or less business driven. It was all about efficiency before, and it's maybe different now. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's exactly true. When we graduated back in the early 90s from a Cold War sort of mentality to a peace dividend sort of mentality, that shift occurred there. The effectiveness versus efficiency shift occurred. You saw it across the industry. You saw it in forces, whereby it was a consolidation, shrinking down, and doing things that were more affordable as opposed to potentially more effective. If you could get some affordability out of better effectiveness, all the better. But clearly the focus was on efficiency, vice effectiveness. Well, when you do that, the bottom line is you shrink your capacity, you shrink your resilience, your ability to be resilient, and your excess kind of goes away. The pool gets smaller. I don't care where you're talking about, people or material. It's now a smaller pool to draw from. And that's been the way it's been, for now 30, 40 years. So we have to shift that around now. We have to kind of get refocused on the fact that we need that effectiveness back in there. We have to now rapidly rebuild and pay for building more effectiveness, more resiliency back into our forces to get there. And we haven't talked about manning yet, and I'm sure we will. But all of the talking about ships and everything else is a great discussion, but without the people to drive them, to man them, and even with degrees of automation introduced in, you're still going to have a great, in my mind, that's going to be the greatest shortage right now, is producing those people, because you don't produce a senior maritime person overnight. That's a 10-year thing to get to be a master or chief engineer, and we don't have 10 years. By many accountings.
Yeah, thinking about the distributed maritime operations, and the logistics challenges they have there, and then putting that in the context of this efficiency versus effectiveness trade-off that you mentioned. I mean, sort of the cheapest way to get, quote, sealift is foreign flag ships, presumably. Perhaps I think that the common understanding would be the least reliable. And when you have U.S. troops and U.S. national security interests at risk, you want something that's reliable. The most expensive way would be with Navy gray hulls, I presume. I think that's pretty well understood, and you have the highest degree of reliability there, and somewhere in between there, probably very close from a cost perspective, close to the foreign flag operations, is U.S. commercial U.S. flag vessels, and a high degree of reliability and relatively low cost. So. I'm wondering, when you think about the DMO and the EABO and other challenges in the Western Pacific operations, what role U.S. flag commercial sealift will play in that, as compared to foreign flag and or Navy gray hulls?
Yeah, I think they're going to play whether they like it or not, a significant role, because they have to. We have a total of 19 combat logistics force ships in the Navy and the Military Sealift Command. Those are the unrep oilers and the unrep ammo ships, dry cargo ships that are available, that are going to be running and doing the delivery with most of the forces. But that's not going to be enough, and that's before we talk about attrition. That's if they all show up, and that's before they start, becoming torpedo sponges, which they will be very high priority targets for, any foe, Chinese for sure. And quite frankly, if distributed maritime operations pans out the way we think it's going to be, there just are not enough combat logistics force ships to go out and meet those disparate groups all over the, dispersed battlefield. There just won't be. So, it's going to take some commercial assets with capabilities that they don't have right now, abilities to transfer at sea. We talk tankers. We have had some unrep capability, underway replenishment capability added to some tankers in the past that has worked quite well. It's modular, put the king post on, the winches and everything come in a 20-foot container, plans on deck, and away you go with the hoses and such, so that those can be sustaining our combat logistics ships. Dry cargo, a little bit more challenging. Back in the break bulk days, we had cargo rigs we could send across. Those don't live anymore, so it's pretty tough to get a container back and forth. Absent a heavy lift helicopter or something like that. So that still has to be kind of figured out and worked out. I think there's great promise, in my view. A lot of our oil field supply vessels that are used to transferring goods, I think a lot of tankage, deck space, they could be pressed into service to go service one or two ships, in a very boutique sort of way, in a small anchorage someplace or somewhere where they could handle the logistics chores for those. So I think we will have to get creative. I think we have fleets out there that can do that, ships that can be modified to do that kind of a distributed sort of mission. Same thing with the Marines. A vessel like that could easily service a small marine garrison on an island, get in close, put the stuff ashore, and be out of there. But it's going to mean putting ships that aren't typically combat ships into forward areas, and that's going to be that's going to harken back to the days of World War II, where we ask our civilian mariners to go forth in peace and war, and go into some pretty dangerous areas.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about the different ways that those ships can be, defenses that would be available for those ships. We use convoys with escorts in World War II. I presume there'd be some of that, but there's other approaches to defending merchant ships that are under discussion or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a little bit. I've said, and based on conversations I've had with Navy folks, we're in all likelihood not going to have sufficient escorts in all likelihood to do big convoy kind of sort of movements. I think there's going to be a lot more individual ships moving. There may be some, but most of the ships that we have today, again, we've drawn forces down. They're shooters. We need their missile tubes forward. Not necessarily available for escort kind of operations. I see an escort role, quite frankly, for autonomous vessels. I think they could be adapted pretty readily. Some of the vessels that we're experimenting with right now, some of the larger ones, to serve as a screen for one or more merchant vessels that are going, either by being sensors for them or carrying defensive weapons, be it a small caliber gun or torpedo that could be controlled from the mothership, if you will, the ship being screened with a tactical advisor on board, a strategic Sealift officer that's serving as a TACAD that could be essentially the weapons control kind of officer, to afford some level of defense for those ships that wouldn't otherwise get it. I think that technology is probably readily adaptable and could be pressed into service pretty quickly. We have enough yard capacity left in the country that we can make smaller vessels like that in numbers, and there's enough technology companies around that can put their kit on board and have I think a reasonably effective capability pretty soon.
Interesting. So just to take a step back, if we can, in terms of looking at the number of ships, and we'll definitely talk about mariners, which is critical part of this. But if we could walk through the numbers that we're really talking about here in terms of the ships that we think we need, commercial ships. We have 85 today. 85 U.S. flagships in the global international commercial fleet of 50,000 ships. I presume we need all of those for under some scenarios for national security reasons.
Keeping in mind that 60 of those are already MSP, Maritime Security Program ships. They're already signed up and getting a stipend. Come when we call them.
Right. So that program is built around the business efficiency model, basically, in my opinion. But that's the baseline we have. That's the nucleus of our commercial capability right now in international markets. And then we're all aware, I believe, of the need for at least 86. The number I hear is 100 additional tankers, more than double the size of the fleet we have today of tankers. Any comment on that one?
Yep, that's for sure. We have the dry side, if you will, the rolling stock and dry stores, that sort of thing, non-petroleum. Transcom, who was ultimately responsible for producing that capability, has the square footage pretty close, as long as everybody shows up. We've got what we think we need to move the Iron Mountain. The the piece of it that's less well defined and less well served is the petroleum oil lubricating side, the bulk fuel, which, you know, MSC has a total of 5 tankers, commercial tankers under charter right now. So that represents the government lift, if you will, that we have at our fingertips right now. You know, if you want to throw in the Jones Act medium range tankers that are sailing around, about 58 of them or so, I think is kind of where we are on that. If you were to rip them all out of domestic trade and put them in, you know, you're still short by dozens of the required fuel lift, again, before attrition. You know, we're going to have to get more tankers from someplace. You know, the recently introduced tanker security program, that's 10 ships. That's, you know, I think the applications closed out yesterday or day before yesterday for the first 10. And talking with the administrator a couple days ago, she assured me there were a lot of ships that had, you know, thrown in to be a part of that. That's another step in that direction, and 10 more authorized for next year. So hopefully we're up to about 20 or so, you know, in a couple of more years. So we're starting to nibble at the right number there, but we still have a ways to go. And oh, by the way, where are the mariners that we're going to use to man those ships? You know, currently they're foreign flag, the majority of those ships. So those are going to have to be U.S. crews that come aboard and man those ships. And, you know, I from my conversations with industry, many of whom are on this call here today, there's real challenges in manning just the ships we have today. And, you know, you talked about finding a bunch of tankermen that, you know, have capability and qualifications to sail these ships. You know, again, more challenge. So we find ourselves bare bones here in this area particularly. And so, you know, the old answer was always, well, we'll just call on the effective U.S. control of ships. You know, there's a lot of U.S. companies that own tankers. They're all flagged out and going other places, doing other things. And once upon a time, that would have been, I think, a good answer and a valid assumption. I don't think that's a very valid assumption these days, given the way vessels are owned, leased, crewed, managed. I mean, there are now so many layers between the owner of the vessel and who actually is operating the vessel and who's on board operating the vessel, that, you know, saying that there is effective U.S. control over it, I think gets to be a bit of a shaky proposition.
The questions, I hate to keep bringing you back to this because I do want to talk a little bit more about the mariners, but the issue. But if we're at 85 now, and we know we need to get to at least 185 in international trade, and I recognize that you know, if the flag went up today, we'd have to look at Jones Act ships, but that's not a very good planning scenario unless we, you know, have no choice. And
they'd have to be backfilled with foreign flag and
right,
you know.
Right. They're not meant for that. I mean, they would be available, you know, in a true war setting. But so that goes from 85 to 185, and then, you know, the number we're talking about for distributed maritime operations, whether they're the workboats. There's another number of vessels there that would be in addition to the 185 we've already identified. And we haven't even talked about the concept of economic security and the importance, you know, and the fact that, you know, we as a country have no control over our maritime logistics supply chain in peacetime. Almost zero.
Yep.
And the law says we're supposed to have U.S. flag commercial fleet supposed to carry a substantial part of our import-export cargoes, and if we're at 1%, I don't think we're meeting the legal standard. So, in any event, that to my mind ought to add a pretty good number of ships that we need to support on top of the 185 plus 25 or whatever the number is. And then, so, if we sort of add all of that up in terms of the number of U.S. flagships that we should have to have an effective deterrent in the context of a Chinese military activation, would we be out of line to say that should be 250 ships?
Yeah, I just wrote down 250. That's the number that's in my mind as well. And for both the military need to support, the defense sort of side of the house, but just to have, the world credibility of having your flag flying off of a vessel on a routine basis in many of these foreign ports, to assure our allies that we're out there, we're trading, we are serious about our maritime posture, and having a presence in sometimes challenging waters lends credence to our argument that we have a right to be talking about it. If we sailing in the South China Sea, there's not a whole lot of U.S. flag ships that are over there on a regular basis. There are ships, obviously sailing there, or they're in liner service, but it's more of a rarity when you take a survey on a port on any given day, Singapore, Kaohsiung, wherever you want to do, to find, the number of U.S. flag ships. You could easily count it on one hand, if and probably have some to spare. So if you want to lend, I think, credibility to your argument that we deserve to be in this area, we trade in this area, we're there regularly. It's not just our gray ships sailing through during freedom of navigation operations. It's our commercial assets, free trading, moving through that area and that neighborhood on a regular basis. That has a deterrent effect, I think, all in itself. And we're missing out on that right now, big time.
Sort of a commercial freedom of navigation exercise. Yeah.
So, there's the two sides of it. Back when I was still at Marriott, someone would ask me, how many more ships do we need under U.S. flag? And by that time, I had boiled it down to enough ships to give me enough people to man the ships that we had, which that number was 40. We used to say 40 ships. So, that would give us another couple of hundred people, which would, give us a little bit of leeway, a little bit of room to man the ready reserve force ships that we had already, let alone anything else. So 250 is a much more realistic number that takes into account both the in peace and war sides of it, both the defense side and the economic security piece.
Yeah, and that seems like a lot when you're talking about a fleet that's now at 85 ships. It's triple the fleet, but it's also only a quarter larger than what has clearly been identified as the need when you take the tankers and the
sadly
tankers.
There are shipping lines in this world that have more ships sailing under their house flag than this number we're talking about, than our national fleet.
Right. So 250 ships would require about 10,000 trained American mariners. Do we have, how are we doing in terms of adding in, what's it going to take? Obviously, we don't have the 250 ships at this point. We do have a good infrastructure of education built up that would need to be expanded. But what do we need to do to get that, and how much time will it take to get that done?
Yeah, well, you can grow, junior officers and unlicensed folks fairly quickly. We turn out about 1,100 new third mates and third assistant engineers every year out of Kings Point and the 6 state maritime academies. So there's 1,100 people that essentially join the ranks every year. Problem is at the senior ranks. Some of the senior unlicensed folks and first assistants, chief mates, masters, and chief engineers. You're talking 8 to 10 years to grow them. Those don't happen overnight. And they have to have berths to sail in order to build that time to get there. And that's been part of the problem that we have seen, is because the fleet has shrunk down so significantly, the availability of sailing berths has, also shrunk down. So having that nice clear path to go sail, get as much time as you need, upgrade straight away, and get up to the senior ranks has been difficult. Plus, the institution of STCW and all of the assessments and requirements that come along with that when you upgrade and maintain your credential is it's not inexpensive. And if you're not sailing, it's very difficult to justify laying out $5,000 or $7,000 to upgrade or to maintain that credential if you're not sailing. So a lot of people have let that fall away, and understandable. Didn't used to be that way in the old days. The old days, you got your radar observer upgraded and away you went. That's where the 80-year-old navigator, on one of the fast Sealift ships back during Desert Storm came from. He still had his license, hadn't been to sea in 30 years, still had his license, went and got his radar observer upgraded, got a new prescription for his glasses, I guess, and went out to sea. He couldn't climb the steps to get up to the bridge, but, that was an extreme case, but we're in that situation now. We have about 12,500 up-to-date practicing mariners today, right now, which is about what the fleet pool supports.
But to grow that, we need the ships.
Yeah. We need places for them to practice their trade to sail, or else have the Coast Guard significantly modify the standard by which they remain qualified. We got into an emergency situation. Who knows? Potentially that would have. There might be some waivers there, or something.
Right. I've got two more questions, and then we'll open it up to others. If you would like to talk about our current government structure for overseeing the American Maritime, with MARAD as the lead agency, pretty far down the org chart at DOT, the Pentagon funding the program, and they're built-in conflict in the sense of any dollars that go to commercial maritime come out of their budget and other priorities that they may have. Is there a better way to organize how the government manages this industry?
Oh, there's got to be, because the current one isn't working so hot. I think my predecessor, Chip Janikin, would agree with me in that MARAD just does not have the authorities that our predecessor organizations once had. I've said on many occasions, my World War II predecessor, Admiral Emery S. Land, who was a maritime administrator, he used to be able to call a phone and talk to FDR. They talk shipbuilding and manning and the whole U.S. Maritime Service. That was, all of that power was resident in one organization, the Maritime Commission. Post-war, that got split up into Federal Maritime Commission and the Maritime Administration. And over time, a lot of the authorities that once were resident in the Maritime Administration have been diluted, either pulled up to Secretary of Commerce or Transportation, depending on where we lived. And of course, we're not, MARAD is not a regulatory body. That's the Coast Guard's authority and Federal Maritime Commission. Maritime's interests in this country are so diluted across so many different cabinet levels. You have DOD, you have DOT, you have DHS for Jones Act and kind of enforcement, Department of State for aid. It goes on and on and on. And the problem with the maritime industry is, we have two missions. We have a wartime mission we have a peacetime mission, and those two missions reside in different departments. So we end up kind of falling through the cracks. How do we get funded? Do we get funded to our wartime kind of requirement, DoD, or do we get funded kind of to our peacetime kind of requirement, commerce and energy and transportation and the rest of the departments that all have a piece, but don't want to fund. So, I found this out the hard way, as did Chip, when we tried to put together a national maritime strategy. Who's in charge? Well, it certainly wasn't MARAD. We found that out, in very clearly. It really has to, these days, that's sort of risen up to, I would say, National Security Council level. It's certainly White House level stuff now where that sort of resides. So who should be in charge? Well, MARAD could be in charge if everybody kind of stacked hands and agreed, but that doesn't exist right now.
Yeah.
So, in realistic terms, if a decision had to get made today, it would have to get refereed at National Security Council level, my opinion.
Right. Well, and that's certainly not a knock on the folks who are doing the best they can at MARAD today and have been all the way through.
Hard. We all have very flat heads over there from banging our heads against the wall.
Okay.
We know what needs to get done and we want to do it, but it's difficult to muster resources or attention to the problem.
Yeah, understood. Okay, well, I'm not sure exactly how to referee this, but I am going to open it up and welcome questions or comments from folks on the call at this time. Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I was going to ask Admiral Busby, thank you for your time. Wanted to know if you had other suggestions that haven't been mentioned with regard to growing the fleet over and above the TSP. That seems to be the obvious way things are going right now. But are there other suggestions that you would have if you were given all those authorities back like in World War II?
Yeah. I think, thanks for the question, Christian, and good to see you. I think it would be great if there could be, and if there was economic incentive for companies to want to flag under U.S. flag, if there was the business for them to carry, if there was the product for them to carry that for the government that incentivized, much like cargo preference. If there was more of that, I think that would be business incentive to be under U.S. flag. I'd rather have it kind of that way rather than trying to drive people to be under U.S. flag. If there was a good reason for them to be under U.S. flag, I think that would be the best of all worlds. So to the extent that we can incentivize companies to, flag in either through tax incentives or stipend, kind of like the MSP, or which is essentially the way TSP is going to work. We all know it's an uneven playing field out there. We're the only ones trying to play fair, and with all the other countries and shipping companies for the most part offering breaks for people, it kind of puts our folks at a real disadvantage. So I think that's probably the simplest answer I can give you. It's probably a lot more in depth. People smarter than me can think of better ways, but I think if you just make it business sense, make a good business case for companies to come in and flag in, that's probably the most enduring way to do it.
So it's a really good question, and I would just add, I think the way to get to 250 ships, if that's the target, there are lots of options, and maybe a commercial cargo preference way, it may be an expanded TSP, it may be a combination of different things, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion and input into that. But the starting place is, what's the target? It seems to me, if there's a target of 250 ships, let's have a conversation about the best way to get there, and how quickly we can do it.
Just saying we need you at wartime, that's a good argument. It's a valid argument, but how about the rest of the time? We need you around. There needs to be something for you to do, and companies understand that, and I understand that. I'm not going to just make you flag in for the sake of flagging in. There's a cost associated with that, and as we all know, why sailmen are foreign flagged. So there's got to be a business case there.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Chip.
Hey, Buzz, thanks for your comments and for your longstanding support for the maritime industry. During your initial comments with regards to the autonomous vessels, you highlighted, the escort, possibility from a sensors and defensive weapons standpoint. But, as the Marine Corps gets more expeditionary, I liken it to island hopping by already being on the island. The autonomous vessel, disposable type vessels that could service some of those distributed forces might be an opportunity. Can you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chip. And thank you for your service too. And yeah, certainly, having something that could drive up on the beach or drive, make a landing or show up at one of those forward operating bases, without having to hazard a bunch of people. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me as well. You could have some sort of automated, medium landing ship or something that could go do that. That I think there's a lot of potential for that as well. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, floor is open. Bob Rice.
Hi, thank you, Admiral. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. One of the things I'm hearing is that basically we're looking at an approach of if you build it, they will come. And I just don't know if that's as far as the mariners, the officers and the mariners to crew these ships that we're anticipating coming online. I think we have to get much better at recruiting, and I'm not quite sure what that looks like. Our maritime academies, we're starting to see a migration towards the Gulf of Mexico for the greener pastures out there and that sort of thing. So I believe those jobs are very cyclical. As everybody knows, there's feast and famine out there. The jobs come and they go. The unions offer stability. So I think we have to sell that message a lot better. And I'd love to hear your comments on that, Admiral, and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for the comments. An area that I am got my fingers in other places. The U.S. Maritime Service back in the World War II, that's exactly what they did. They went out and they recruited, they beat bushes, they tried to get people, another great shortage of people back then and getting people to sail. And, that was a government entity that did that. We don't have that government entity. Still on the books, could be activated if the Secretary wanted to, but it's, probably not gonna. So, to me, we need a similar sort of effort, potentially from industry that maybe gets together, because all unions, shipping companies, everybody, you're all out there trying to get people. You're all out there trying to recruit people, and you get them in and they get trained up, and then they become free agents. They kind of go all over the place. So it's tough to kind of justify kind of an investment sometime. You get kind of a front organization that does that recruiting, that goes out and beats those bushes, that, does the promotions on, media or TV or whatever to get people interested in maritime careers, and then just shows them the door and they matriculate through, any number of the training pipelines that are out there and then show up in the fleet. I think the time has come. We got to do something like that. And I know there are a couple of nascent efforts underway right now that I'm aware of that are kind of focused on that kind of thing.
Thank you, Admiral.
Yeah, you bet.
Just not on TikTok, right?
Right. Exactly.
Good. Any more questions? We're getting toward the end of the hour here. Any more questions or comments?
You know, that I'll just, while we're waiting for, and just to kind of sort of put a final point on that we haven't really talked about, and that's the industrial base, the shipbuilding side of this, which, you know, if we want to sustain our merchant marine, we're either going to have to, we're going to go with what we got. We're going to hopefully have some time to build some new, or if hostilities start, we're going to grab whoever's in port, like we did in World War I, you know, paint over the home port, put New York or San Diego on it, run up the stars and stripes, and now it's our ship. You know, that's not going to be, and they're probably not going to be the right kinds of ships, but, you know, we're going to be needing ships, and we're going to be needing a lot of them. Hopefully we can, you know, get our industrial base charged up enough that we can build some. We're not going to build 250, that's for darn sure. So it's going to have to be a combination of purpose-built ships that we build here that are, you know, focused capability, some that we take up out of trade, and others that we, you know, kind of as the Navy's kind of, and MARAD are doing now, bringing in ships that are currently trading and flagging them in so that we can increase our fleet that way. It's going to take really all of those solutions, but
Yeah.
increasing the industrial base, I think, has got to be, I think, an important part of what we're doing here, of this focus.
Thank you for mentioning that, and completely agree. We have to figure it out, it is, you know, absolutely critical for lots of reasons. So I'm glad you brought that up. Let me just mention, we have on the schedule, or just our scheduling now, the next event in this series, and that will be on March 13th at 1:30 p.m. We have former chairman of the Transportation Committee, Peter DeFazio, joining us for a conversation about the maritime industry, details to be determined. And that will be a live event here at the Hudson Institute, and it will be live streamed also. So in-person attendance will be welcomed and encouraged on March 13th. And then you'll also be able to watch it live at that time also. So please mark your calendars. And if you want further information about the program, please email me again at mroberts@hudson.org. And no more plugs here. But thank you all very much for coming. Thank you so much, Admiral Busby. Really, really great comments and insights. And we'll look forward to working with you further on these issues.
I look forward to seeing more U.S. flagships out there.
Amen.